I feared that everything would come down collapsing on us. Alex had stolen a lighter from his father before entering, but he was in front of me and the meat light it produced did little to reassure me. After insecurely moving along the path for a minute or so, we arrived at a dead end, at which point he said that we could stand up. He was right, we now had to shimmy along a far wall. I assumed we were right on the edge of the house, between the outer and inner walls. I could hear the sound of a television somewhere, although it was playing something that sounded really old. Finally, Alex said,
"Look."
He pointed the lighter at some point in space in front of him. I had to squint to look, and even then I didn't really see anything in the dense darkness, so I swiped the lighter from him and used it myself. That's when I managed to make it out. It was, well, sort of a hole in the wall, I guess. Opposite to where we were standing was this big indentation in the far wall, roughly egg-shaped, with cut-off wiring and steel frames sticking out of the edges, as if a little meteorite had crashed in there. I could only make out the vaguest contours in the dark, but I could see markings on the inside, which were murky brown in color, amorphous in shape. Alex told me that, according to his neighbor, the man who owned this house in the distant past left his son to die in that hole when he discovered that he was the product of his wife's affair. The baby eventually stood this tale with mild fascination, with the same tone as a tour guide describes a slaughter that took place hundreds of years ago, so it no longer carries emotional weight. I kind of nodded and stood there for a while. Eventually we crawled back out, played some cards for a while and then I left. His mom offered me lemonade. She was very nice, but looked very tired. I remember telling Aaron and Brad about the adventure and they said that Alex had probably made the story up on the spot just to impress me. Then there was the requisite teasing and taunting about how the two of us would get married and have babies but Alex would be too poor to support them. I swear that year when my teacher said that girls mature faster than boys I felt like life in its entirety had been explained to me. In all honesty, I think that Alex just wanted to be friends with me, because his family, his clothes and his country bumpkin appearance repelled most of the kids at our school. I only went back to his house once, like a week later. It was an equally hot day and I walked there once again. I remember back then there was the whole scare about the dog killer and how children were advised to stay at home, but I didn't pay it much mind. This time Alex came running down the stairs to tell me, with bated breath, that I really had to see something. We went back in that crawl space. A minute of groping around blind, some 30 seconds of sidling along some insulation, and we were there. This time Alex said, "Look," with an almost diabolical expression, and took out a flashlight, which was quite an improvement over a measly lighter. Now I could see things more clearly. The hole looked about what I imagined it did on my first visit, but now I could make out those smudges inside. They were amorphous brown stains that could have very well been made with feces or something equally unpleasant. Together they created some vague shape. Alex told me to take a step back. He said that the figure looked like a baby. He started pointing out the facial features and body as he saw them, but I didn't really see anything. Just a bunch of smudges and marks. I rolled my eyes and said that we should get back out. And as soon as I said that there was this sound, like all the air was being sucked out of the house, it was kind of like the sound a river would have made if it were flowing under our feet. The sound intensified, began to shake the planks and loosen bits of paint and dust from the roof. And suddenly we heard this crash, like a refrigerator had been dropped from the top story, and we thought the whole thing was coming down on us, collapsing, so we screamed and ran blindly back where we came from, back into the crawl space, frantically wiggling out towards freedom. When we got out we found Alex's mother standing there, arms akimbo, looking at us disapprovingly. We were coated in white paint flakes and dust. She had probably heard us screaming like idiots, and was particularly mad at Alex, who she had warned not to enter that place again. She said she would have the entrance boarded up by tomorrow. I didn't get the chance to go back to Alex's house after that. He was grounded for the rest of the summer, apparently, and once school started it became evident that we weren't in the same crowds and quickly drifted apart. As I said, he moved to some other part of town a few years later. I'm pretty sure the guys remember that. Oh, and according to his mom the big crashing sound we had heard had been a garbage truck outside, though at the time I didn't buy it. What is really weird and makes this entry deserving of being in the notebooks is that, well, I've passed that apartment complex where Alex lived several times while coming back from university. His father closed down the clinic when they moved and now it's a private residence. It's been remodeled substantially. But I have passed that place and I have looked at it from every conceivable angle, and I have gone over the memories in my head with great care, but it still doesn't fit. The crawl space, I mean. There is no place in that house, no space, for that passage, and the wall with the insulation space, and the hole. It simply doesn't make sense. And I've asked a friend in architecture what purpose would a structure like that serve, and she said that it would be completely out of place in a building like that, and for that matter it would probably be out of place in any building. Notes. Not much to say, honestly. I think it's fairly clear that this was written by Tati, but this Alex person is a mystery to me. I asked my parents if there were any clinics around Tati's neighborhood in past years, but they couldn't answer. Aaron told me a story the other day. I'm not sure if he was kidding or not. When Aaron was 12 or so and his parents would take him to see a psychologist after soccer practice, he recalled seeing a lady every day. The psychologist worked out of his apartment in the third floor of a complex. After the session was over, he would take the elevator back down and wait outside the building for his parents to pick him up. They would ask him how it went and he would reply with a half-hearted, "Well." Next to the apartment building was a small retail store, summer dresses and ladies' shoes and the like. At the time that Aaron was waiting for his parents to arrive, the owner was returning from her lunch break to reopen the store. She was a lady in her mid-40s, from the looks of it. She wore colorful, loud dresses with odd prints. Before coming back into the store she would stand outside and smoke, looking exasperated. Sometimes she would shoot a furtive glance in Aaron's direction. He figured that maybe she knew that he was going to see the psychologist in the third floor. She had probably seen many boys like him waiting in that precise spot for their parents to pick him up. The store windows exhibited gaudy mannequins, sometimes lacking arms or facial features, draped in clothing that couldn't have been fashionable, even back then. Aaron would stare at them out of having nothing else to do, and also because the lady made him nervous. Sometimes she would stand directly next to him and smoke. But she would always retreat into the store before his parents arrived. She was wrinkled and covered in makeup, always staring off beyond the streets and buildings, expecting trouble to arrive. This was when Aaron began to realize, after so many awkward meetings in silence, that the ladies' clothes seemed to be the very same ones that were sold at the store. That seemed sensible enough, as a form of self-advertisement, or something. But what made Aaron curious is that whenever she was wearing one particular dress, that dress was no longer on display at the store. It was like every night she took one of the mannequin's outfits and wore it herself, then moved on to another one. Aaron came to assume that nobody else worked at the tiny store. He never saw anyone walk in or out. He regarded her with mild confusion and never told his parents anything. Months after this had begun, Aaron's appointment was switched to the late afternoon one day. He took the elevator up and waited outside his door. He grew impatient and knocked, even though he could hear talking, and then presumably sobbing, coming from inside. He recognized the psychologist's voice telling him to please wait a moment. So he sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Several minutes passed with intervals of silence and sobbing. Then he finally heard steps in his direction and the door swung open. Out came the lady from the store. She wiped her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief and stared, dumbfounded, for a moment at him, evidently surprised to see him there, as if he had caught her in the middle of doing something bad. Desperate, anxious look she always carried. Then she walked away and the psychologist ushered him into his apartment. On the last day of these, when Aaron's parents figured that he no longer needed the sessions, and had complained sufficiently about how expensive they were, Aaron was saddened to realize, while he waited outside for his parents to arrive, that the store had closed and was now empty. I asked Aaron to write this story down himself, but he declined. It seems that in every group of childhood friends there is one requisite expert in tall tales. The kind of boy who will tell you that there is a fourth flute in Mario 3 or a super secret character in Street Fighter. Or that his dad killed a lion on his trip to Africa. Or that his mom is a movie actress. You know the type. Aaron was our resident tall tale specialist, and one of my best friends. He is still both of these things. We mock him and enjoy his alleged exploits, which he can never back up. When we were still in grade school and sister was a baby, we had been learning about the Aztecs in school, for some reason, and Aaron and I were obsessed with the concept of ritual sacrifice, especially if it allowed for communion with the gods. So what we would do is, we would head out to Echo Lake. We would roll up our pant legs and stand around on the shore with glass jars, looking to swipe up some fish. Some relatively large ones got close to the surface and sometimes we got lucky. The other kids feeding breadcrumbs to the geese would look at us weird, something I would quickly get used to. Now, prior to this we had dug a small hole in the ground behind some bushes, near the rusted swing set that you can still find there. The hole was originally dug out so Aaron and Frank could safely bury Tati's doll. which is also an interesting story, but a different one. At that point we weren't using the hole for anything. We would take the fish there and gut them with our school utensils, pens and pencils, while they were still alive, and then we would toss their smelly remains into the hole. With our hands covered in fish blood, we would kneel before a makeshift sacrificial altar, and recite this solemn prayer: "We make this sacrifice to you, O Xochipilli, and hope for guidance in return." Xochipilli was one of the Aztecs' gods, appropriated from another culture, if I recall correctly. He was one of the few gods whose name we could recall correctly, albeit we usually couldn't spell it correctly, so he was our god of choice. We didn't know what he actually stood for. Sometimes after our daily sacrifice we would sit there and wait, taking turns putting our ears close to the hole, waiting for some voice to emanate out and reveal, I don't know, our fates, or the existence of a god, or the answers for tomorrow's math test. Eventually we would get bored and go do something else, but continued to do this for approximately 1 month. Looking back on it, I find it felicitously odd that nobody called us out on our strange and recurrent behavior. The other kids that regularly went to the lake simply kept their distance. The altar of Xochipilli was tucked away in a faraway part of the park, and nobody used the swing sets anyway, so the pungent smell, which gradually became more notorious as the hole got full of rotting, gutted fish, was hardly ever noticed by others. Xochipilli would not respond to us, but our efforts went undeterred. As I mentioned, our daily sacrifices went on for at least a month. Then something rather momentous happened. We weren't the only kids in the neighborhood with a penchant for animal cruelty. There was another gang of kids, 1 or 2 years older than us, who would hang out near the lake and throw stones at the geese. I figure they mostly had the intent of simply scaring them away, but on one occasion, one of the kids hit a goose squarely in the head. Very good aim or luck, really. The adults at the scene were mock horrified for the violent tendencies of children these days, and how their generation wasn't like that, and how video games were to blame, and so on. The goose was violently trying to swim, suspended upside down, drowning while trying to make it to shore. A concerned father waded a few meters into the water, grabbed the animal by the leg, and put it down softly on the shore as a crowd of onlookers gathered. Its head had been smashed and it was bleeding profusely. Some silly old lady suggested that they take it to a veterinarian, which was immediately dismissed by everyone with a modicum of common sense. It was understood that the bird was dying, and nobody was brave enough to put it out of its misery, so they just left it there. The goose convulsed and flapped its wings in pain every minute or so. The adults had left the scene, taking their children with them, and in a matter of minutes that section of the shore was left deserted. The animal struggled through its final throes. Of course, Aaron and I had other plans for it. In our minds, it went like this: the bigger the sacrifice, the better the response. And this was a big sacrifice. Once the area had been abandoned, we sneaked close to the animal and confirmed that it was still barely clinging onto life, as demonstrated by its infrequent spasms. We dragged the animal back to the altar of Xochipilli. I told Aaron that he should have the honors for this one, mostly because I felt queasy about it. He was initially drunk on bloodlust, and without thinking about it twice, he took out his pen and stabbed the animal in the breast. Warm, red blood jutted forth. That's when we realized that we couldn't mutilate it. The goose seemed too alive, not alien-like fish, too similar to our own pets. So we just stood there, feeling a little bad about ourselves, waiting for it to finally die. It struggled for only another minute or so. We quickly got to work. By this point the hole was almost entirely full of fish guts, rotting ones, at that. It's a marvel that we could stand to be near the horrid smell, but I suppose you have a greater resistance to these things as an intrepid and somewhat disturbed child. We grabbed the goose and pushed it into the altar of Xochipilli. Our hands were once again covered in blood. With its new sacrifice, the altar looked rather sinister. The goose's smashed and head poked its way out of the hole, its neck, sustained by rigor mortis I guess, propping it up, with one